Late 1967, London, a private party tucked away in a fashionable flat in Chelsea. It was one of those intimate, smoke-filled gatherings where the true architects of rock music would convene after the rigid schedule of the city's nightclubs had closed their doors around 11. The flat belonged to a music journalist, a trusted confidant of the scene, who hosted these casual, unpretentious salons regularly. The guest list was small, maybe 20 people in total, a compressed collection of artistic genius, musicians from rival bands, key producers, a few knowing photographers, and the occasional fortunate hanger-on. The vibe was thick with creative energy, yet relaxed. People sat on plush carpets, shared heavy bottles of dark red wine, and talked with a focused intensity about music, gear, and the changing world for hours on end. The Rolling Stones were in a brief, necessary lull between tours, recharging after a grueling year of recording and performing that had cemented their status as the world's most dangerous band. Jimi Hendrix, meanwhile, was the inescapable, revolutionary topic of conversation. The Jimi Hendrix Experience had just released Are You Experienced a few months earlier, and every guitarist in Britain, from the pub bluesmen to the established idols, was obsessed with figuring out the source of his alien sounds, how he coaxed such visceral, expressive noise from a simple Fender Stratocaster. The question wasn't if he was a genius, it was how his genius worked, and whether it could be deciphered by mere mortals. Keith Richards arrived around midnight with Mick Jagger, his presence commanding yet casual. He carried his worn, faithful Fender Telecaster in a gig bag. Keith brought guitars to parties the way other people brought wine, always ready to play, always looking for genuine musical conversation or, perhaps, a friendly skirmish. At 23, Keith was already recognized as one of rock's foundational rhythm guitarists, arguably the great rhythm guitarist. His signature sound, that driving, hypnotic, almost primitive rhythm that gave the Rolling Stones their essential, powerful pulse, came from open G tuning, a technique he had meticulously adapted from obscure Delta blues masters like Skip James and Ry Cooder, and then made distinctly his own. It was the rhythmic foundation upon which the Stones' temple was built. Jimmy was already planted in a corner, sitting casually with his pristine white Stratocaster resting on his knee, quietly noodling to himself. He was not performing for the room, he was simply existing in a musical continuum, playing for the pure joy of discovery. People would occasionally pause their conversations to listen, but Jimmy seemed unaware, lost in the intricate world of his own sound. Keith noticed him immediately. Every serious musician in London felt a gravitational pull toward Jimmy, needing to witness his magic up close. Keith, Telecaster bag in hand, moved toward him. "Jimi Hendrix," Keith said, extending his hand, his voice carrying the authority of his position. "Keith Richards," Jimmy replied, meeting the handshake with his usual quiet respect. "Big fan of your work." Likewise, Keith returned easily, but with an underlying curiosity that betrayed his competitive nature. "Mind if I join you?" Jimmy gestured to the chair next to him. "Please." They plugged into small, inexpensive practice amps someone had set up in the corner, tiny boxes of sound that forced intimacy. The noise of the party continued around them, but a small, silent crowd instinctively gathered, recognizing the significance of two of rock's most innovative guitarists sharing a space. They began with a simple blues progression, a universal language. Keith anchored the rhythm, driving, percussive, fundamentally honest. Jimmy soared above it with lead lines that were fluid, expressive, and vocal, two distinct styles complementing each other perfectly. After a few minutes, Keith stopped playing, the rhythm suddenly ceasing. He started meticulously retuning his Telecaster. "You play open tuning?" Keith asked Jimmy, watching his reaction carefully. "Standard tuning mostly," Jimmy replied, honest and direct. Keith smiled, a hint of proprietary pride in the gesture. "Open G changed everything for me. Learned it from old blues records. You take the low E string off completely, or tune it down to D, and tune the rest to a G chord. It makes certain voicings impossible, but it opens up others. The Stones' sound is built on it, that droning foundation." He demonstrated immediately, playing a riff instantly recognizable as his signature sound, the ringing open strings creating a constant drone beneath the melody, giving the guitar a bigger, more resonant sound than standard tuning typically allowed. It was primal, percussive, and immediately effective, the sound of movement and urgent rhythm. "That's beautiful," Jimi said, genuinely impressed, leaning closer to examine the unique fingering. "Never really explored alternate tunings much." Keith felt a small, justified surge of satisfaction. Here was Jimi Hendrix, the guitar genius everyone was talking about, admitting he didn't know something Keith had mastered. It felt good to be the expert for once, to have a foundational piece of knowledge that the celebrated innovator lacked. "Finally, one area where I'm ahead. Want to try it?" Keith asked, barely concealing his eagerness to teach. "I can show you how to tune it." "Sure," Jimi agreed, picking up his Stratocaster. Keith walked him through the precise mechanical steps: low E comes off, or down to D. A string down to G, D and G stay. B string down to G, high E stays. Jimi's fingers moved with the intuitive precision of a master craftsman, tuning by ear, getting each string exactly right. It took him perhaps 30 seconds to execute the entire physical reconfiguration. "Like this?" Jimi asked, strumming the open strings. A perfect, ringing G chord filled the corner. "Exactly," Keith confirmed. "Now, the thing about open G is you can play full chords with one finger. It makes rhythm playing easier, but you have to relearn where everything is. You have to unlearn the standard map." Keith demonstrated a few basic shapes, showing Jimi how familiar chord progressions looked profoundly different in this new environment. Jimi watched carefully, tried the shapes himself, and grasped them immediately, his long fingers finding the new intervals without hesitation. "Okay, try playing something," Keith instructed, fully expecting Jimi to struggle with the unfamiliar tuning, to need 20 minutes or more to adjust to the new internal logic. Jimi started playing. At first, he proceeded cautiously, exploring the tuning like someone walking into a dark, unknown room, feeling for the walls, understanding the new acoustic space. His fingers moved tentatively, finding where the notes were, testing the intervals, discovering what made sense and what resisted. But after maybe 10 seconds, literally 10 seconds, a flash that redefined the concept of musical absorption, something profound clicked in his musical brain. His fingers found the core patterns, his ear understood the internal logic of the tuning, and he saw how open G was both different from and strangely similar to the blues foundation of standard tuning. Then, he was off and running, unleashed. Jimi played a blues riff in open G that sounded like he had been mastering that specific tuning for years, not minutes. He found voicings Keith had never conceived of, combinations of fretted notes and open strings that created textures and harmonics Keith hadn't known were even possible. He made the Stratocaster ring and drone in ways that were distinctly open G, that big, resonant, open sound, but also distinctly Jimi, somehow both traditional, honoring the Delta roots, and revolutionary, pulling the sound into 1967. He was playing the intricate, primal blues of Skip James and Robert Johnson, but filtered through the electric, psychedelic lens of a modern genius. Keith stopped playing completely. His Telecaster hung silent, a beautiful, inert sculpture in his hands. He could do nothing but watch. Jimi kept going, exploring the tuning in real time, discovering its possibilities like an explorer mapping a new continent with blinding speed. He played slide-like phrases without using a slide, letting the open string sustain a constant drone while his fingers found melody notes above them, creating pedal tones that made one guitar sound like 2 or 3 instruments simultaneously. He found harmonic sweet spots, places on the neck where the fretted notes and open strings created natural, bell-like overtones that made the guitar sound like it had built-in reverb, like it was being played in a massive cathedral. He made open G sound both ancient, like something dredged from the Mississippi Delta in 1930, and futuristic, like something that wouldn't be invented for another decade. The small crowd that had gathered went completely silent. They were witnessing a spectacle not of fire, but of pure, instantaneous, terrifying musical assimilation. A master guitarist encountering a new linguistic framework and mastering its syntax, semantics, and poetry in real time. After about 2 minutes of this staggering improvisation, Jimi stopped and looked at Keith, his expression one of pure, unadulterated excitement. "This is incredible," Jimi said. "Why don't more people use this?" Keith couldn't respond immediately. He was processing what he just heard. Open G tuning was his signature, his identity. He had spent years of tedious practice, years of songwriting, years of internalizing its limitations and potential, mastering it. And Jimi had just picked it up in 30 seconds and found things in it Keith hadn't discovered in years of playing. The moment was a profound blow to his ego, a sobering realization of the chasm between technical mastery and true genius. "You've never played Open G before?" Keith finally asked, his voice rough. "Never," Jimi confirmed. "Just learned it now from you." Keith felt something complex, a mix of intense admiration, genuine curiosity, and a sting of humbling defeat. He'd wanted to show Jimi something, to be the expert, to teach the student. Instead, he just watched the student instantly surpass the teacher. That was something else," Keith admitted, finally finding his voice. "Honestly, I've been playing Open G for years, and you just found voicings I've never heard." Jimi looked surprised, genuinely unaware of the magnitude of his feat. "Really? I was just experimenting." "You're the master of this tuning." Jumpin' Jack Flash, Street Fighting Man, those songs defined Open G for a generation. "I thought I was the master," Keith countered with a rueful, genuine smile. "Then I watched you play it for 2 minutes and realized I've been thinking too small. You just showed me my own tuning has more possibilities than I knew. That's the difference between technical knowledge and musical genius. I know how Open G works. You understand how music works." Their conversation immediately became a genuine collaboration, a mutual exploration, the ego set aside in service of musical discovery. They played together for a while longer, both in Open G now. Jimi would try a melodic voicing, a harmonic idea, and Keith would immediately build on it, adding his own percussive attack to Jimi's melodic exploration. Keith would play a riff he'd been working on, and Jimi would instantaneously take it somewhere completely unexpected, showing Keith possibilities in his own ideas he hadn't seen. The small crowd that had gathered stood mesmerized, witnessing a unique conversation. At one point, Keith stopped playing and spoke, his voice carrying both humor and genuine vulnerability. "I showed you this tuning because I thought it was something I could teach you, something I knew that you didn't. Like I'd finally found one single bloody area where I was ahead of Jimi Hendrix." Jimi replied generously, "We're using different tools for different purposes. Your rhythm playing in Open G is perfect for what the Stones do. Driving, relentless, hypnotic. What I was doing wouldn't work for your band, but maybe it works for mine." Keith nodded. "That's generous, but honestly, what you just did humbled me in a good way. I thought I'd mastered this tuning. You showed me I just scratched the surface." The party continued around them, but Keith and Jimi stayed planted in that corner for another hour, maybe more, completely absorbed in their musical conversation. By the end of the night, Keith's understanding of his own signature tuning had fundamentally expanded. He'd always thought of Open G primarily as a rhythm tool, a way to get that chunky, percussive, driving sound. Jimi had shown him it could also be melodic, textural, atmospheric, contemplative, that the same tuning could serve completely different musical purposes depending on the questions you asked of it. In interviews years later, Keith would tell this story with a mixture of self-deprecating humor and profound respect. In a 1989 interview, he confessed, "Meeting Jimi was humbling for a lot of guitarists, me included, and I mean properly humbling. I remember showing him Open G tuning, feeling quite pleased with myself for knowing something he didn't. Then he played it for about 2 minutes and showed me I'd been thinking about my own tuning in limited ways, in safe ways. That's what genius does. It expands everyone else's thinking, forces you to reconsider things you thought you'd figured out." The interviewer asked, did it bother you that he picked it up so fast? Keith laughed. At first, maybe a little. Your ego takes a hit when you realize you're not as advanced as you thought, but then it becomes inspiring. Jimi didn't make me feel bad about my playing. He made me excited to practice more, to explore more, to stop being comfortable with what I already knew. This infusion of Jimi's textural and melodic sensibility can be heard in the later Stones albums, marking a subtle but permanent evolution in Keith's application of his signature tuning. Mick Jagger, who witnessed the event, later recalled, "I remember Keith came back from talking with Jimi and he was buzzing, excited, humbled. He said, 'I just got schooled in my own tuning.' But he wasn't bitter about it. He was energized." That's the mark of a real musician, being able to learn even when your ego takes a hit. This incident quickly became legendary among British guitarists, reaching Eric Clapton, who affirmed it as classic Jimi. He'd encounter something new and just absorb it instantly. When Jimi died in September 1970, Keith was devastated. At a Stones concert shortly after, Keith dedicated Jumping Jack Flash, one of his signature Open G songs, to Jimi's memory. Before playing it, he told the audience, "This is a song built on Open G tuning. A friend named Jimi showed me things about that tuning I'd never known, and I'd been playing it for years. This one's for him." The dedication was not just a tribute, it was a public acknowledgement of the profound, unsolicited lesson Jimi had given him. Keith Richards challenged Jimi to try Open G tuning, expecting to teach the master something new, to find a small victory for the rhythm guitarist over the lead innovator. Instead, he watched Jimi master it in 30 seconds and reveal melodic possibilities Keith had never imagined. But instead of feeling defeated, Keith felt inspired, grateful for the expansion of his own artistic world. The lesson from that Chelsea party isn't about who was better, it is about the nature of artistry. The lesson is about staying humble, staying curious, and understanding that even your signature techniques have depths you haven't explored yet. Keith thought he'd mastered Open G, Jimi showed him mastery is a journey, not a destination. And Keith was grateful for the lesson, ensuring the melodic influence of that night lived on in the driving, powerful sound of the Rolling Stones.